Hello again, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of Radio Vault Mystery Theater. I am the Keeper of the Vault. I've been told that behind every great man, there is a strong woman steering and directing his energies. This holds true still for cosmic entities. It takes tenacity and spirit to withstand the pressure of power. Tonight, we'll see how a woman's dedication can lead to a dramatic change in the natural order of our world in a metamorphosis of the heart. Act 1. Tonight's tale began decades ago. Long before the internet and our incessant attachment to modern technology, Amy had wanted to be a writer for as long as she could hold a crayon to ruin her mother's yellowing wallpaper, and use that desire to push her to academic excellence. The inferno within her blazed so hot that it threatened everything around her well into adulthood. Currently, it choked the compassion from her chest, and it hardened her into a no-nonsense modern woman with ink-stained fingertips and a critical eye that no degree of etiquette could hide. Across her desk, at the local newspaper publishing house, sat a squat, graying woman with more jewelry than she'd ever seen on a woman, and spectacles thicker than the heel of her shoes.
Mrs. Stratton, thank you for taking the time to interview with me. I will be taking notes of this conversation. Are you prepared to continue?
Of course, my dear. I must remind you that I insist on remaining anonymous for the duration.
Absolutely. Let's begin. Where were you when you heard the shots on St. Valentine's Day?
I was at breakfast, naturally, in London Park, overlooking the lake. My husband took us to our favorite place for breakfast, which happened to be a few blocks away from that terrible business. They had barely brought out the tea before we heard the guns fire.
And then what did you and your husband do after?
We had to see what the commotion was about, but of course we weren't the only ones. Windows and doors opened so people could take a peek, and it was only down the block. We saw 7 of them. There was so much blood. They were dead by the time we saw them, and the police had already arrived.
Was there something else you and your husband saw before you left the scene?
Other than the shells from the Tommy guns? Nothing. Whoever had done it had run off long before we got there and left those gangsters against the warehouse. Left tire tracks in the street.
Interviews are leading us to believe this was related to the bootlegging rivalry between the North and South Side gangs. What do you believe?
Ever since the North Side gang started taking up the territory in Lincoln Park, a lot of folks have noticed more crimes. Lots of beatings and thefts. Now, I'm a God-fearing Christian woman and I uphold the laws of our state. But my husband, he swore it had to do with the whiskey shipment.
What whiskey?
The Canadian whiskey sent down the Detroit River that Capone's boys never got.
Because the North and South Side gangs were both known bootleggers, the gang violence between Al Capone and Bugsy Moran wasn't news to Amy. It was the darting eyes and the way that Miss Stratton's hand floated to a handkerchief to cover his mouth at the mention of stolen liquor that gave her pause. None of her previous interviews had alluded to any stolen goods, not even guessed at it.
Now 7 men are dead in the middle of Northside's territory, right in the middle of the warehouse district they keep their distilleries in.
You have the right of it. That's what my husband had said. But nobody seems to be saying it. Maybe you can get one of the men here to write something about it?
Miss Amy Henan to you, ma'am. You can look for my article on the subject this Friday, if you would kindly see yourself out of my office.
Mrs. Stratton turned an ugly shade of puce when Amy Henan didn't stand. In her mind, Amy had earned the right to sass an informant who would not read the name off the plaque on her desk. She spent her entire career as a reporter, used to the callousness of Americans, used to being called the secretary instead of the writer. Her parents immigrated before she was born, yet being native to the soil did nothing to encourage the people to stop asking if she could see out of her slanted eyes, or why she didn't have a husband. Now, as a reporter working at one of Chicago's most reputable papers, she would not tolerate it. Now Amy was a disciplined reporter, and she would chase a lead until she couldn't anymore. And this was no different. Covering her desk with a map of the city, she marked the position of the previous day's bloodbath.
If it came down the river, then that would mean that it had to have been grabbed before it got to Detroit. But it would have needed to come through Benton Harbor if they really stole it from Capone. Maybe it didn't come through the harbor and they drove the shipment into town. But if they did, they would have to bribe some people to get the liquor past the police. And we know 2 of the gunmen were dressed as police, according to eyewitnesses, which means there is at least 1 cop playing both sides.
Amy finishes her cigarette with a proud and wolfish smile, already thinking about the exact badge she's going to speak to. End of Act 1. And now, Act 2. The Lincoln precinct in Chicago was full of coppers, most of which wouldn't bother with Amy, but there was one detective she knew well, a plainclothes type named Horne. He was a difficult man, but she'd questioned him previously for the paper, and he had been receptive to her careful prodding. Now, after years of a rapport, she knew she could rely on him for plenty of off-the-record information without flirtation, which made him an invaluable resource to her.
You want what?
I want to know who you have undercover working between the gangs.
You do realize what undercover means, don't you?
You do realize I haven't published any evidence of North or South Side gangs bribing the department yet. Why would I do it now?
It is not that simple, damn it, and you know that. You're asking to dig your claws into a sensitive and federal investigation.
And all I want to know is if one of the victims from yesterday moved goods from Capone's territory and into North Side.
You don't need to meet an undercover to do that. I could have told you that North Side has been doing this for months now. This is just the tip of the iceberg, Amy.
Tell me this, Abel. If you're not investigating the bootleggers with the feds, what are you trying to find?
Amy kept herself still, despite the unbridled fury that threatened to send her head spinning. It hadn't taken much for her to make this discovery, and she could see the way it set Horne on edge, his thin lips tightening as he paled. Already sallow compared to the nicotine-stained wallpaper of his office, her steady gaze did not waver against his intense blue eyes, wild with irritation and anxiety.
If I could tell you, I would, but the information is classified.
You're really going to feed me that crap?
What I will tell you is that it wasn't just whiskey that Bugsy had his boys nab. I won't tell you who the go-between is. I'm not going to be responsible for you getting him killed. There was an item with the shipment, a brooch. A couple of the Northside boys sold it to this collector, Jimmy Connroe. You might remember him. He famously bought some freaky paintings for thousands from a nutter at Dunning's poorhouse over a decade ago. Take this address, and if I catch a whiff of this in the papers...
I'm sorry. Do you really think I'm gullible enough to believe you? Bootleggers stole jewelry and sold it to someone, and this prompts a 7-way homicide? Huh, this is a joke.
It ain't a joke, and you need to pay attention. There was a brooch, silver, with all yellow jewels. It gave our informant the willies. Said he had nightmares for weeks after. Said Connroe was like a kid with candy over it, though.
It was the severity of his tone that made her reconsider his honesty. Horne had always been reliable before, and his stern expression was enough to make Amy second-guess her instincts that this was all crap. If it wasn't for the mention of the name Connroe, Amy might not have accepted this explanation at all, but the old collector was well known for the oddities in his antique store.
Fine. But if this doesn't give me answers, I'll be back. Understood?
You'll get more than answers. Look, Amy, if you do get to see it, don't touch it. Don't touch anything in that shop. Got it?
All right, Horne. Thanks for the tip.
Jimmy Connroe had made quite a name for himself across the eastern seaboard for his incredible collection of antiques of all varieties. His name had been through the papers frequently for the last decade alone, most notably for the spending of vast amounts of money at auctions all over the world in pursuit of his strange cult acquisitions. Amy had never set foot in his shop before, but the storefront was instantly recognizable. The grim sign posted read, "Connroe's Collection," in elegant yellow letters. The window display was filled with things from elegant metal tea sets to tattered books whose leather binding was weeping at the chance to escape. The shop was painfully warm against the chill of the spring air, and as soon as her hand touched the door, Amy could feel the sweat building at the nape of her neck. The inside of the shop was filled with knickknacks. The face that greeted her was withered with a smile that glinted with gold fillings, attached to a man in a pinstripe suit with gold accenting his entire person.
Welcome to Connroe's Collection. I am Jimmy himself, and you look just like the kind of beautiful woman who needs something pretty. Am I right?
You are. I wanted to find something pretty for my mother. Yesterday was her first Valentine's without my late father.
Well, my condolences to your family, miss. You've come to exactly the right place. I have many different unique antiques. Are you thinking of art, or housewares, or jewelry?
My mother has no eye for art, no. But perhaps jewelry. Did you have something in mind? She likes gold.
Right around here, we have our collection of gold pieces, mostly earrings. Does she have pierced ears? Or would she prefer a necklace?
Despite the nerves in her belly, she continued faint interest over the items, questioning Jimmy dutifully when he passed over each item, indicating each one was leaving her wanting and not quite right. Some of the accessories were quite beautiful, but she made a careful effort not to touch any of them, as Horne had warned, despite the fact that there was no evidence to their strangeness. But as Amy perused the jewelry, The nerves began to rip through her throat like bile, and the sweat building at the back of her hairline was growing the longer she stayed near Connroe. Fighting through the discomfort, Amy fixed the aging man with a stare.
I'm not certain any of these are right. Do you have anything more exotic than this? My mother has exacting and strange tastes.
What kind of exotic? African or Egyptian? You sure look oriental. We have some pieces from Japan, mostly for the hair, except for some vases. What about that?
You would do well to remember that only antiques are oriental and not people. Perhaps I should take my business elsewhere.
Oh, I apologize, miss. I was only thinking to appeal to your heritage. I will remember. Let me try and find something from the back that I think you might like.
Connroe disappeared for a long time after that, leaving Amy to her own steam in the main shop. It was like the heat of the place made her angrier than usual. The relief swelled in her as he left the room, leaving the space cooler. She had lectured many about her race, but never when she was in such a delicate position as she was now in this investigation. The minutes ticked by, and her rage wanted to give way to impatience and anxiety.
Just relax. You won't be here forever. You just need to get this gift, and then we can move on and finish writing the article. You just have to find the man who brought the brooch in. That's it.
All right, miss. I think you're going to like this. It's one of a kind. Silver with inlaid citron and tourmaline. It's a recent acquisition. Just got it a little over a week ago. What do you think of it?
Ooh, that really is a beautiful brooch. What does the symbol mean?
It's a protection charm. One of those sigils or something all the way from Tibet. I didn't have it on the floor yet because I was waiting for the appraiser. But you seem like someone with exacting tastes, Miss Henan.
The brooch was stunning. The gems curled into a swirl of a question mark supported by two prongs. And when Jimmy Connroe held the velvet box out to her, she could not help but reach out for it, entranced by its beauty. In fact, she was so taken that she didn't notice the use of her name, one she had never shared with Connroe. When her fingers brushed against the glittering tourmaline, her hand jolted with electricity, and her world went black. End of Act 2. And now, a word from our sponsors.
My name is Joe Backbehinder, and I'm here to tell you how you can earn up to $1,000 or more in an unspecified period of time. Does your best practices paradigm have issues monetizing the full stratagem potential of a goal-oriented 36,000-foot vision quest? Do you need to fully realize your next-gen cloud-sourced value-added content management system? Modular, convergent, fuzzy logic, immersion innovation is our middle name. We all need to leverage our sustainable globalization of a more responsive, streamlined, virtualized scalability. Can a nanotech enterprise service bus-based exit strategy milestone really diversify share options in a Web 2.0 brick-and-mortar portal outside the box? You be the judge. Best-in-class Tiptronic synergy technology is the keystone of our forward-focused holistic political capital. Think about your stakeholders' spin-up mindshare bandwidth in relation to a best-of-breed transmedia survival strategy. Make sense now? At the end of the day, our ballpark figure analytics can enable you to procure a win-win framework and brand the low-hanging fruit in your core competency empowerment to downsize your return on investment. What are you waiting for? Be a proactive aggregator, attain alignment, and engage in some FaceTime with our Reverse Fulfillment Offshore Collaboration Center. Why not download our mission-critical cross-platform visibility solution and reclaim your company's real-time sync-up today?
And now, Act 3. For a moment, Amy was suspended from reality in the recesses of her mind. The discomfort of the unnaturally warm shop had left her entirely, replaced instead with unbearable pressure that she could feel over every inch of her body.
I knew I could count on Jimmy to deliver you to me.
Who? What is that?
I told him I needed someone with a real fire in their chest. I didn't think he would find someone so soon. But here you are, trapped in my grasp.
Trapped was the word that made Amy's head spin, eyes piercing into endless darkness to find anything of use to her. But there was nothing except the crackle of flames that she could almost feel.
Show yourself, creature.
I am no creature, but a powerful fiend of fire and darkness. I am formless and unknowable, intangible and eternal. And I have tasted the flames of your hearts, and I declare you perfect. Henan.
Perfect for what?
The darkness around her grew thicker, more tangible somehow, as it curled and swept itself into thick, undulating cords of darkness, writhing until they became a slender mass of equal height, with an eyeless face split into a razor-sharp grin, with flames crackling in its throat. The half-formed visage terrified Amy, leaving her knees trembling. The entity reached for her, its abhorrent tentacles tightening with anticipation as it drew closer to her.
No!
She found the fire inside her and used it to keep herself steady as a thick cord of darkness slithered around her throat. The shadow's darkness seared against Amy's flames, and their shapes twisted together in a righteous clash of ink and heat. As Amy fought with every ounce of her mettle, she realized too late that the shadow was not consuming her. Too late, she felt the heat of her body soldering the darkness against her, forging her shape into something new, but familiar. When the burning finally ceased, she looked down at herself to see polished obsidian move against her body like water, steam and smoke rising off her fingertips.
Better. Much better.
Dismissing the darkness, light flooded their eyes as the shop came back into view. Amy's eyes drank in the room, as if for the first time, and perhaps it was, as she saw it with a new perspective. The gold in Connroe's mouth glinted violently at her with a hellish light, twinkling in a way it had not before. Those lights decorated the entire shop in strategic places, by the door, by the counter, on each main case. Some treasures in the room glowed in strange colors that Amy had not seen before, and a different sensation overwhelmed her. Comfort. The heat of the room was no longer unbearable. Gone was the sweat staining her blouse, and she felt taller than she had in years.
Now, feel better that you've got your vessel?
It is so good to be solid again, James. Your services will not be forgotten.
Excellent. I'm always happy to oblige a great old one like yourself. Now let's get to work.
Amy Henan died that day, but in her metamorphosis became something hotter than flame and more omnipresent than darkness. This may be the end of Act 3, but it's not the end of the shadow. A Metamorphosis of the Heart is a production by Troupe of Lost Souls Entertainment and Film Syndicate. Written by Contessa. Produced by Anthony Stapiello. Sound effects and video post, and directed by Trevor Bates. Commercials by Joe J. Thomas. The cast was played by Joycelyn Lew as Amy Henan, Stephanie Warren as Mrs. Stratton, J. Anthony McCarthy as Detective Horne, Joe J. Thomas as Jimmy Connroe, Contessa as the Shadow.
And I am Trevor Bates, your psychotic storyteller and keeper of the vault. Remember, check out our Linktree to give you access to all of our social media. So make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date. Don't want to miss the nightmares, do you? Check us out and listen if you dare.